A smattering of these headlines as we go to Nomi Prins. Here is Rolling Stone saying what she wrote 6-7 years ago in her best-selling book, The People versus Goldman Sachs. A Senate committee has laid out the evidence. Now the Justice Department should bring criminal charges. When Obama is completely financed by these people, 4 times what McCain was. Not saying McCain was good. He was clearly the heir apparent. Here's some of the other headlines. China, for 5th month straight, accelerates dumping of U.S. treasuries, not buying them. Here's another one, Washington Post. Treasury to tap pensions to help fund government. And I'm now hearing calls to tax private pensions, just as the same group of foreign banks, the bailout money shows who owns the Federal Reserve, mainly foreign banks, have started taking the private pensions, the 100% owned by you. This isn't welfare. You know, most of these government pensions you paid for as well. But now they're going after the private ones, and that's coming next. These people aren't going to stop. They haven't set up anti-terror brigades and having 60-minute specials about anybody that doesn't love this being a terrorist because they're going to play patty cake. They're going to bring us to our knees to enslave us through economic degradation. And Nomi Prins is our guest for 5 minutes in the next hour. She is a journalist and senior fellow at Demos. Her latest book, It Takes a Pillage, Behind the Bonuses, Bailouts, and Backdoor Deals. She is the author of Other People's Money, The Corporate Mugging of America, 2004. A devastating expose, so I guess she did this 7 years ago, into corporate corruption, politics, collusion on Wall Street. I read the book. She predicted everything that now happened. Other People's Money was chosen by the best book, 2004, by The Economist, Barron's, in the Library Journal. Her book, Jacked, How Conservatives Are Picking Your Pocket, Whether You Voted for Them or Not, gets into how they're claiming they're conservative but are running all the corporate welfare. Before becoming a journalist, Nomi worked for the Wall Street Journal as a managing director at Goldman Sachs. Not at Wall Street Journal, at Wall Street as a managing director at Goldman Sachs, and running the international analytics group at Bear Stearns in London. And we've got her here to talk about all of this. Nomi, since we had you on a month ago, a lot has happened. What is most important on your radar screen? Then I've got my questions.
Well, you know, everything you said is important. I want to start at the end maybe and work backwards because it just was the latest bit of news that pissed me off and I think is just ridiculous, which is that Tim-Geithner has said that in order to make the debt cap, if Congress doesn't raise it, he is going to have to stop paying on civil personnel, their disability funds, their pension funds, potentially private pension funds. These are things that people have paid into. These are obligations that have already been agreed upon. And this is what he's talking about going after in order to manage the debt problem. Now, I just want to point out, and I've said this on the show, and I just want to re-point out, there is over $4 trillion at the Fed today, in their latest report, in their weekly report, that breaks down into $1.5 trillion of treasuries, almost $1 trillion of mortgage and asset-backed securities from the bailout time, and $1.5 trillion worth of excess reserves that the banks are putting money at the Fed to get interest upon that is just sitting there. So while he is talking about taking money away from people who have earned it, have saved it, have agreed that they are going to receive it, small, tiny, little amounts. There is over $4 trillion of money doing nothing but sitting at the Fed to subsidize the banking system. And we talk about the debt problem. We talk about the deficit problem. $4 trillion. Bigger than the size of our budget, bigger than the size of any problems, created since the fall of 2008, still there, still only a portion of the full bailout of the banking system, but sitting there. And if anyone had, if Geithner or anyone had, you know, a small modicum of logic or brainfulness or whatever it might be, that would be a place to get some money from. You know, we gave it to the banks. Banks profited from it. Banks still profited from it. They're not changing the way they do things and what they do. And there is money there sitting, available, while all these pontifications and the notion of taking it away from individuals is going on. It's just, it is mind-boggling.
And by the way, your mainline Democrats have been fooled. They say raise taxes, pay my pension funds, which is exactly what the big central banks want, because that won't go to them. It'll go offshore to their fraudulent interest and the systems. Now, they fool the mainline conservatives by saying, we got to fix America. slash these public pension funds, maybe even go after private ones. It's conservative when you could get rid of all of that. We've broken down the numbers, and it wouldn't do anything to the 1,000+ trillion in derivatives, the unfunded mandates, all of it. And then they say, well, quit bashing Wall Street, Alex. They're free market. Really, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, Berkshire Hathaway, Citibank, they're the ones that got the banker bailout, and then they sit there and lecture us about free market while they all file record profits, record bonuses just domestically, not to mention that, over 80% of it's being shipped overseas, and they're paying near zero on it. This is going according to plan. They're robbing us, the greatest robbery in history, and you hit the nail on the head. They've got $4 trillion sitting there liquid, but they're waiting to loan that out to widows at 79.9% credit card rates. They're not going to, no, sir. They're going to hold us hostage and cut the benefits and cut people's pension funds they paid into, and then they're going to have the Republicans go right along with it like idiots, killing the economy.
Well, exactly, and it is a bipartisan issue. Yes, it's Republicans going after it. It's the Democrats not noticing it. It's like stealing $4 trillion and having it out there like in the middle of daylight, and not have anybody sort of who is in control of potentially getting to it do anything about it. It's mind-boggling. And then you move on to what's going on in Europe, and the bigger scandal of the IMF, which isn't just whatever might come out of the sexual assault case on the former chief or chief in waiting for his home bail or in jail or wherever he might be right now, which is that, for example, Greece is being asked to pay 25% interest rates on money that's coming to them, not just from the IMF and the EU, but of course because the market, the bankers are slaughtering the country, which is what has happened with all of the peripheral countries in Europe. It's not really different from what's happening to those, the widows and the pensioners and everyone else here. We're being asked to pay 30% or more on credit card rates. We're having homes taken away under fraudulent means and everything else. The same thing is happening systematically through the IMF, through the EU and Europe for the peripheral countries. And there have been bailouts there. Greece, for example, did get a bailout of $141 billion last year. And by the way, before that bailout, the former head of the IMF, Dominique-Strauss, had said that everything was going to be fine. Only one bailout would be needed. B, austerity measures that would be put upon the people of Greece would be enough. And there would be no other bailouts happening in the rest of Europe. For example, in Portugal, which just got its bailout created and approved by the EU and the IMF on Monday, while Dominique-Strauss was in court. So the stuff that happened under him and the stuff that the IMF has been doing has been extracting, again, and blaming pension funds and society types of programs when, in fact, it was the banks that trashed those economies.
Well, that came out just last year in Iceland. The people finally called their bluff and got the documents, and even the Financial Times had to admit over 90% of the debt was not the government or the people's. It was the very central banks demanding the money. That's what's crazy. They're like, pay us back the debts, and it's their debt. Same thing in Ireland. They're the apple of the world's eye until they go into the EU. That puts them under these banking rules, and suddenly they're in trouble, and now they're maneuvering the U.S. to losing its AAA rating, so we'll be paying 25%. And then once we go to that point, there's no way to ever get out of debt. It's designed to make us debt slaves. And Nomi, what about this? Because you worked at the highest levels with these people. How do you deal with Geithner up there saying, if you don't raise the debt ceiling, you're going to cause a default, when they've already technically defaulted by monetizing 70+% of the Treasury bills? I mean, even Standard & Poor's said it's all this spending and the banker bailout that's doing this. But then Geithner stands up there blaming what they've created on us trying to reverse what's happening.
Well, again, he's completely incompetent and misguided, but comes from the same banking system that enabled all of this to happen. As head of the New York Fed, no, he didn't work at Goldman, he didn't work at J.P. Morgan Chase, but, the New York Fed's Class 8 subprime director is Jamie Dimon and was Jamie Dimon at J.P. Morgan Chase. So they really came from the same fold, and the fold was to enable the least amount of rules and the cheapest amount of capital to leverage the most, and that when it all fell apart, debt would be created, and Geithner just sort of moved from his post at the New York Fed to the Treasury Department, where it's officially a public office, but in fact is really just an extension of the private banking functions that he was doing. Our debt and our GDP are almost equivalent. You know, we're talking the difference of a couple $100 billion. Our entire debt is because of this, and most of it has happened in the last decade, but more of that has happened in the last 2.5 years since the financial crisis was made apparent by Wall Street. $4 trillion of debt, again, is at the Fed. $4 trillion was created by the Treasury Department. It's the same number. There was just a transfer, and that all happened with Tim Geithner. So it's wrong economically. It's certainly wrong socially. It's wrong from a policy perspective.
But they stand to gain by wrecking societies. They've done this to countless third world countries.
It's cheaper. It is cheaper. You do it to third world countries. You raise the interest rates, and it's not just by doing it officially. You do it because that's where capital flies in, capital flies out, capital makes decisions. It's the derivatives market, it's the currency markets, it's the way these central banks operate, and you wind up creating some dominant bank-oriented countries, and every other country and every other individual of those countries winds up suffering from the cost of having created that debt to make the whole entire thing float.
Excellent points. Isn't it? I mean, it's elementary, but how do you explain something so simple to a population that the establishment media has been fed the left-right paradigm of rob the middle class to keep the welfare net going on the left, to Republicans slash everything to keep things going? Either way is just two different arms of the same predatory system. I mean, here's what I'm getting at here. We know that they create the derivatives bubble, make huge profits on the way up, then they use the crisis they've created as this giant cancer, and they say you've got to feed the cancer or the whole body is going to die. And then it's so massive that now the whole world orbits the Ponzi scheme because we're buffalo that the whole world will collapse financially if we don't give in to them. But we're being absorbed. The giving in is the slow death. We've got a chance. I mean, how do we break through to the public that doesn't understand this? How do you simplify it for them?
Well, that's the thing. It's almost like bodies like the Fed, the Treasury Department, the IMF that are all in that same philosophy that you just outlined, is this idea of amassing profit very quickly, moving capital around when it all falls apart, creating debt to keep it going, and extracting that debt from everybody else who wasn't in the position of power to benefit or to benefit from the original profit. Profit on the way up, profit on the way down. And it's sort of like those bodies and the people, it's like the mafia sort of like running into your town or basically taking over anything, the pizza place, the dry cleaners, or whatever it might be, and saying, you know what, you're going to keep on paying us, because if you don't pay us, we're going to kill you. And by the way, if you can't pay us, we're going to kill you. And by paying us, it will kill you. It's a very...
When it would just be better to go ahead and make sure the mafia guy doesn't make it back out of the business.
Oh, yeah, extract them out. I mean, the problem is these aren't, Tim Geithner...
No, this is the mafia that controls...
This is someone that we basically is appointed. This isn't even someone who has to go through a public process.
It's foreign banks that have hijacked America, that have 20,000 nuclear weapons, and, Nomi, incredible information. Let's come back and talk about what you see coming in the future. Any comments on Dominique-Strauss, the rutting chimpanzee con? And we'll also get your take on ideas to reverse this. Former managing director at Goldman Sachs. I've been blowing the whistle now for 7, 8, 9 years. Nomi Prins is our guest.